Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge, and a special shout out to our presenting sponsor of this and every Highway to Hoover podcast this season, Academy Sports and Outdoors, a place that is full of fond memories for me. I got to say, Mark,
Yeah. What's your favorite aisle to shop in at Academy?
I mean, if I'm going to take like the baseball bats and gloves aisle out of it, because that's a little too on the nose, to be honest, I used to like to go down, at least at the Academy I grew up going to, when you walked in the door, immediately on the left, they had like punching bags.
Yeah.
I used to like to go up to them and try to do the speed bag and then punch the heavy bag. And only then you realized how impressive it was when you'd watch a pro boxer hitting a heavy bag and it's like really even side to side, because appreciate how heavy that thing is.
It doesn't do that when you hit it.
Right. When I hit it,
or normal person.
Right. I start swinging side to side when I hit. What about you? You have a favorite aisle other than
probably the sunglasses? I like I like to go in and try different styles on and see things I would never actually purchase and just kind of see what they look like. Eventually, you're going to find something that you feel, okay, I can pull this off, and that's the winner, right? And then you rock those for at least 6 weeks until you lose them.
That's right, until you drop at the bottom of the lake or something. Yeah, I used to also be even more so as an adult, because the punching bag thing mostly as a kid, although, I'd still probably go in there and give it a go. But I went through a period of time in my 20s where I was doing a decent bit of fishing, and I used to go just like putz around the aisles with the fishing gear. Like really, I didn't need a lot of that stuff, but it's just like,
it's fun to kind of fantasize a little bit. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So thank you again to our presenting sponsors, Academy Sports and Outdoors. Today on this episode of our SEC team preview series, we're going to talk about Arkansas. Still the most consistent regular season team in the league. Really, you have to go back to that 2016 season when things just really kind of fell apart for them to go back to a season when they weren't excellent. Really, ever since then, in terms of regular season results, they've been excellent. Obviously we could talk about what happens after that.
And we will.
But we'll kind of start with the on the field stuff. And I guess we'll start with the pitching staff, Mark, because why wouldn't we? I mean, it's once again, and we kind of say this every year at this point, but that Arkansas has on paper the best pitching staff in the conference and by extension the country. But this year it almost feels kind of, in terms of talent, leaps and bounds better than most everyone else. I mean, I guess you could just the Justin Lampkin factor of A&M, like, could you make an argument or what have you? But I don't know, like, this pitching staff is just, when you talk about, Gabe Gackle and Zach Root and Gage Wood and Vital Shees. I mean, it's a combination of guys they've developed in the program, guys they pulled out of the transfer portal. And you and I think joked in the offseason that there's a lot of consternation about Arkansas's offensive production, which we'll also talk about. And so in the portal, it feels like their fan base is just begging, like, can we please get the big name portal guy who's going to come here and be a masher? And Arkansas's coaching staff keeps going, can I interest you in another left-hander? And look, I mean, they're going to, barring something extremely surprising, they're really going to pitch it. Because on paper, again, like, this is the most talented staff in the country.
Yeah, easily. And, we said that coming into last season, and on paper and probably for a decent part of the season, I would agree it was. And it seemed like it just sort of got away from them late. I mean, Hagen Smith was phenomenal throughout, but then after that, it was inconsistent. And it wasn't certainly didn't live up to the expectations that we all had. And maybe they weren't fair, but heading into this season, the expectations are even higher, because to your point, I mean, they brought in Zach Root, from East Carolina, who was the top left-hander in the portal. And then they brought in Landon Beetleshees, who's the top left-hander in the portal B, right? So how do you get both those guys? But they managed to do it. And then you still got Gabe Gackle, who was certainly one of the best freshmen in the country a year ago. He served as a closer. He's going to move into the Friday role. It's just been phenomenal. I'm a huge Gackle guy. I think, he's a sophomore. Heading, if his trajectory continues, I mean, he's going to be one of the best pitchers in the country this year. Not to mention, he's got another year in payable. Gage Wood's another guy I'm really interested to see. He's now a junior. He's really pitched out of the pen his first 2 years. Came in during the offseason in better shape, just improved his stuff, just kind of refocused, right? Not that there was anything wrong before, but it just kind of, sometimes some of us, it just sort of clicks and we understand how we need to get better. And he's figured that out. And as a result, he, even with all this great talent that's coming in, he's right in the mix to be a weekend guy for them, which just stretches them out even further. A guy that David Seifert saw this, he's our prospects guy. He saw him this fall. Cole Gibbler, freshman, just super impressed with him. Said he, on another staff, he's a weekend guy, maybe even a Friday guy. But, with all these guys in front of him, they can slow play him and ease him in and make sure he's ready for May and June, which, we'll get to that in a minute, which is where Arkansas really needs the improvement. You got a guy like Carson Wiggins, who's going to throw 3 digits, right? He's a freshman coming in. Maybe he's your closer. You just come in and go, all right, go balls to the wall and do your thing and not try to stretch him out and make him a starter yet. He follows the Gackle mode, right? And he's able to do that. You still got Christian Fouch, another guy who can throw, 98 to 100, who's in the bullpen. You got Will McIntyre, who's back. I think we went to high school together. I mean, not really, but he's been around a long time, and he pitched in a lot of big games and really understands and just a great dugout presence, right? This guy is going to fight his tail off for you, and to have him there, I love having that sort of presence in the pen. They've got Aiden Jimenez, who was at Oregon State. He was a weekend guy, right? And was injured. Now he's coming back. What happens if he gets, if he continues to develop? I mean, there's so many options. Ben Bybee, Hunter Dietz, Colin Fisher, and we can go on. I mean, it's one of these rosters that have so many options from a pitching standpoint. How do you find the right roles for these guys? Because they're all so talented and they all have different strengths and perhaps weaknesses that the staff can try to figure out, where they fit. So that's going to be fascinating, especially early in the year. I love that Arkansas is playing 4-game series, with Washington State, so they can, you have extra games to kind of see. All right, we got quote weekend, an extra weekend game that we can work through some of these roles. So yeah, I mean, that's really, if you're looking at Arkansas, it all starts on the mound, and if they're as good as expected, I mean, they're going to have just another great regular season and win just a ton of games.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see once we get to the meat of the season and we start moving towards, let's say, May, how the pitching staff looks at that point. Because I don't have any concerns about quality necessarily, but it does seem to me that there's always, as the season gets to the business end, it's always something with the pitching staff that kind of ends up hamstringing Arkansas, right? Where, last year, a lot of it's stuff outside of their control, right? Like Brady Tigert missed some time with injury, and it felt like he never really got back to his peak form. Cody Frank got hurt, at some point last year, which hurt the bullpen depth. Mason Molina kind of fell off that, there at the end. So, and then in previous years, we've just kind of seen where it was just seemingly a lack of trust in most of the pitching staff. Like, I think everybody can point to the 2021 year when it was like they built the entire boat out of Kevin Kopps.
Yeah.
And like, I don't blame him. That, I mean, he was the best
a really
player
good boat.
Right. It was a sturdy boat. Right up until that Jose Torres swing, so it just always seems like we talk about this with Arkansas each year, and maybe if the offense had been up to par with some of those really good Arkansas offenses of 5 to 7 years ago, maybe we wouldn't even really be looking at this, but it does strike me that it seems like there's always something when we get to May and June where the pitching staff is still obviously quality on the high end, but it just feels a little bit short for some reason. And again, some of that's out of their control, but I just can't fight that feeling that it's always something when we get to May or June that keeps their pitching staff from being kind of the juggernaut that we think it can be in the end.
Yeah, so let's go there. So I do think that some of the postseason struggles have been due to either not having the trust or the players not have earned the trust, whichever way you want to take that, to expand that staff and to have guys ready to come in and continue to pitch, because Arkansas is not really playing offensively much different in the postseason than they played in the regular season. They're just not pitching as well, right? Because the pitching carried them in these recent regular seasons. And then you get to the postseason and, you have a bad day and your margin for error is so small that now you're in the loser's bracket. And now you've got to depend on some guys who perhaps either weren't ready for it, or you're having to go back to guys too often that they can really handle that role. So that's part of what we want to see from the Hogs is having that, that guy who's 8 through 12, and certainly in the preseason they're there, but can they evolve into a point where, hey, it's a regional, we're in a clutch moment, we can go to this guy and he's going to give us what we need, right? And I do think that if you get that, the offense does look improved, and if it is, then this is a team that's certainly going to play in Omaha, because the pitching is, you stack Arkansas's pitchers 1 through 12 against anybody in the country, and you're going to take Arkansas. Okay. So when you have that kind of advantage, your offense just has to be competent. Okay. And it has to come through in clutch situations, especially in the postseason. And if you get those things, we're looking at a really, really fun year in Fayetteville. Now, the question is going to be, Arkansas did lose some good hitters. You got 6 starters that are gone positionally. So you're got to fill some holes. You got to plug in some guys. You're hoping that some part-time players become full-time stars, which, that's part of our sport. That happens. But I do feel like that's really where I'm focused on. With this pitching staff and their track record, I'm buying just based on the talent. And now it's a question of, is the offense going to be where it needs to be for them to reach the goals that, the expectations that everyone, even whether you're in Fayetteville or whether you're just looking in from the outside like us, you feel like this is one of the best teams in the country. You need to be in Omaha in June.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's the expectation. That's why we have them ranked where they are. And you're right to pinpoint that, like, it really is going to come down to the offense. Like, yes, you and I can quibble with the pitching staff getting a little bit short and maybe a lack of trust where maybe they're, and again, of course, those coaches have forgotten more about pitching than we'll ever know, but it's easy for us to sit here and critique, but that's something we notice. But the bigger thing is going to be the offensive production. That's always probably was going to be true with this team, but in this version of the SEC where, if you want to win big, you got to be able to slug, and Arkansas just hasn't been able to totally live up the last several years. And that's definitely, and it makes you vulnerable, right? And that's largely kind of what happened last year's regional at home, where, I go back to the Kansas State game where they just had one inning where Kansas State just ambushed them, and they get a big home run from Kalen Culpepper. And that was kind of all she wrote. Arkansas clawed back in and kind of fought and scratched, but it was just, they couldn't overcome that one inning where Kansas State was just all over them.
It's a haymaker. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. They landed a haymaker and they got back up, but they were staggering around the ring for the next 5 rounds. And then they lost a decision, to use boxing terminology.
Yeah.
So that's going to be what it comes down to. And I think, if we're going to take the optimistic view here, and first of all, if you want to hear the major optimistic view, Mike Rooney is all in on this position player group. I'm optimistically all in, or optimistically in, maybe not all in. I don't know what the right terminology is there, but I do think there are a few things you can look at. I think there's a lot of signs pointing towards Bahiba Aloy having, his numbers were already good, but just becoming a better all around hitter where you mix in some more hitability with the power. I've heard a lot of optimism about Nolan Souza taking another step forward.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a healthy Kendall Diggs is just kind of like a nice, like load bearing wall of their operation where he's probably not going to be like the flashiest guy out there, or the put up the biggest numbers, but just a veteran present that's been through a lot of big games with them. And last year gutted through a what sounds like a pretty bad shoulder injury that he just, just totally fought through all season long. So you can squint and come up, Brent Iredale, right? The JUCO Australian guy who can really swing it. I saw Ryder Helfrich in the Cape and he was excellent, just hitting balls out all over the place. So again, like you can go line item by line item here and come up with a lot of reasons for optimism. We just have to see it. And I think we're at the point where there was a time not so long ago where you and I were already doing this podcast. As a matter of fact, I think it was probably 2 years ago, our first time we did a season preview series, where I said, I would be shocked if they don't put what I would call an effective offense on the field. And then they just really didn't, relative to the rest of the league. And that's happened a couple of years in a row. So it is to the point now where I'm no longer quite as willing to just assume that it's going to be an effective lineup. Like they're going to have to prove it. And again, I think there's plenty of reasons for optimism that they will prove it. I do think across the board, kind of the dynamism of the lineup is up. It feels like a lineup that can do a lot of different things in a way that previous lineups maybe couldn't. So there's a lot to like there, but we are kind of in a wait and see with Arkansas when it comes to offense. I just think that's the reality of it.
Yeah. I mean, you know how I feel. I mean, you win in the SEC, and therefore the SEC's, playing at the top of the sport right now with strikeouts and home runs. So I think the strikeouts are going to come, right? Okay, from a pitching standpoint, pitching strikeouts and home runs, and I think they're going to be there. So, and they were there really the last couple of years. So then the next piece is from a home run and run production standpoint, where is Arkansas? I do feel like if you've got a scrap and claw for every run, as good as your pitching is, your margin for error is so small, it's eventually going to catch up with you. And I feel like, you need Ryder Helfrich to break loose and be a power threat. You need Logan Maxwell, the TCU transfer, to come through and be a middle of the order guy who's going to be a run producer. I think Brent Iredale, the JC transfer, from what we've, what we have learned about him, just a blood and guts kind of guy who's going to fight you, and we all love those guys, right? So I think, and Kendall Diggs, you mentioned Aloy, you mentioned, what does Souza give you? Justin Thomas is a really talented player. He started his career at Georgia, went to JC route, now he's at Arkansas. Looks like he's going to be the everyday left fielder. That's a dynamic presence to that lineup. Can give you, maybe he can give you a little bit of a speed element as well, along with some pop, and I do think that helps. But I'm really interested to see, what's the run production look like? What's that heart of that lineup? Are you going to have guys who are going to hit like last year 9, 9, 9, and 14, or are you going to have guys who are going to hit 15 to 20? Or perhaps even more than that, because if you look at the teams that played in Omaha, that's what they were hitting, right? So it's not all about that. You certainly need to do other things well, but if you have those other things and you're going to compete at the top of the sport, you got to get out of jams with strikeouts, and you got to have crooked numbers with home runs, and that's where I think Arkansas's got to step up their game to finally get over that hurdle. We say finally, right? It's what, 3 out of 4 years. The other year they went on the road and made it to Omaha, but there's been some some home hiccups, and I feel like that's the kind of thing that kind of takes a life of its own. And I feel, if Arkansas is going to get past that, and let's put this in the rearview mirror and forget about it, I think that's the path. They've got to come out and just bludgeon people, and they can, right?
Yeah, I think there can develop some scar tissue when you start losing at home, and it takes on a life of its own. And I think Georgia Tech is probably a program that's there. I think Oklahoma State is probably a program that, like, Arkansas victimized them in 2022. They go to Stillwater,
bludgeoned them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Like, that was about as offensive a regional as I think has ever existed. But yeah, it can, when it's condensed over a short period of time, because it's one thing if, okay, we've lost some home regionals, but they were spread out over the course of 15 years. That's one thing. But I mean, there's some carryover in terms of guys who have been on this roster that have lost home regionals. And so that's obviously a different deal. Regionals and super regionals. So that scar tissue can form, but all it takes is one breakthrough to fix a lot of that. So that's what they're aiming for this year. And certainly the talent to get it done. That's always going to be the case at Arkansas. One thing I will kind of say with my chest is that if you can win 18 SEC games, which they do basically every year, sometimes they win more than that, but 18 is kind of like the bottom. If they can do that, they can win in the postseason. There is nothing wrong with what they are doing.
Right.
There's nothing rotten here that needs to be like rooted out. It's just that sometimes sometimes maybe the team gets cold at the wrong time, or maybe the roster's just not exactly right. But there's nothing here that says that, they need to shake this thing up and make sweeping. No, it's, if you can win 44 games and 18 league games, you're fine.
Yeah. I mean, they won series from better teams who beat than the ones who beat them in the postseason. Right. It's just the timing is so important. And now it's kind of one of these things, as you mentioned, it's kind of looming out there until you squash it, you hit it with the hammer, and it shatters into 1,000 pieces, and people are going to talk about it.
Yep, that's right. I think that's right. So we will see whether Arkansas can shatter that, get back to making deep postseason runs. Certainly with them ranked being where we have them inside the top 5 here at D1 Baseball, we certainly think that is in the offing, but we will see. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, Academy Sports and Outdoors. Really appreciate having those folks on board with us. Another reminder, if you haven't been listening to this whole series, to go and leave us a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts. If you leave a question in your actual review, we will read it and answer it on the podcast to get a little interactive element there, but we appreciate everyone who has already done so. I have noticed an uptick in those reviews and ratings and things of that nature. So we greatly appreciate you guys doing that for us. It helps us quite a bit. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. And thank you, the listener, for listening.